Let me tell you something that Microsoft does not want to say out loud in any earnings call, any shareholder meeting, or any carefully worded press release. The people who built their entire lives on Windows, the ones who trusted it for 3 decades, who taught their children on it, who ran their businesses on it, who never even considered another option, those people are leaving. Quietly, methodically, and in growing numbers. Not because some tech influencer told them to, not because they wanted to learn something new, but because Windows gave them no other choice. And the numbers? The numbers are already showing it. The Steam hardware survey, the developer polls, the community forums where migration posts now read less like experiments and more like announcements. The data is speaking, and it is saying something that should terrify Redmond. This is not a crisis on the horizon. It is a crisis in motion. So today, we are going to walk through exactly how Microsoft built this slow-burning disaster, layer by layer, decision by decision, and why the abandonment that everyone once dismissed as empty frustration is now becoming the most measurable migration trend in personal computing history. Every great falling out has a starting point. For Windows and its users, that starting point has a name, the TPM 2.0 requirement. When Microsoft announced the minimum specifications for Windows 11, the technical community did a double take. Buried inside the list of requirements was a mandate for a trusted platform module, TPM 2.0, a security chip that handles cryptographic functions, supports BitLocker encryption, and verifies platform integrity at the hardware level. On paper, it sounds like a reasonable security upgrade. In reality, what it became was something far more damaging to the user relationship, a line drawn in the sand that declared millions of perfectly capable machines obsolete overnight. Here is what the requirement actually means in practice. A 6-year-old laptop, still running Windows 10 without a single performance complaint, with a solid processor, adequate RAM, and a fast storage drive, a machine that satisfies every other Windows 11 specification. Gets a red mark from Microsoft's PC Health Check tool, not because it cannot run Windows 11, but because its manufacturer did not include a TPM 2.0 chip in that particular hardware configuration. The machine works, the machine is capable, but according to Microsoft, the machine is finished. Now, it would be intellectually dishonest to pretend that TPM 2.0 has no security value. It does. Enterprise environments use it. BitLocker depends on it. Secure boot integrity verification runs through it. These are real, documented benefits. Or the honest critique is not that the technology is useless. The honest critique is that applying it as a hard eligibility block, an absolute barrier, rather than a recommended feature, is not a security decision. It is a business decision dressed in the language of security. Because who benefits most when millions of users are told their hardware is now officially unsupported? The OEM partners, the retailers, the manufacturers waiting to sell the next generation of certified machines, and indirectly, Microsoft itself, whose licensing revenue is tied to the hardware refresh cycle. When your eligibility criteria are calibrated to the exact threshold that forces a hardware upgrade, rather than enabling a software one, you are not protecting users. You are monetizing their loyalty. The community understood this, and the community did not forget it. If the TPM requirement was the spark, the forced Microsoft account was the accelerant. Windows 11. Home removed that option from the standard setup process. Not as a footnote, not as a small interface change, but as a fundamental restructuring of the out-of-box experience. The setup screen now requires an internet connection and guides users, firmly, persistently, toward creating or signing into a Microsoft account before they can proceed. A local account path exists, technically, but it requires knowing the right workarounds, typing specific commands, or navigating menus that Microsoft has not made obvious. For the average user setting up a new computer, the path of least resistance now runs directly through Microsoft's data infrastructure. A Microsoft account is not just a login, it is a data collection node. It connects your device to Microsoft's telemetry systems in ways that a local account never did. It enables the synchronization of usage patterns, browsing behavior, and account-associated activity in a way that enriches advertising profiles and feeds into targeting systems. The data has commercial value. And the moment users understood that the company collecting this data was also the company that had just declared their hardware obsolete, the trust deficit compounded rapidly. European regulators noticed. GDPR compliance questions were raised about the forced account requirements' data collection implications. The fact that a regulatory body felt compelled to examine this speaks to something real, that the line between a feature and a data extraction mechanism had become uncomfortably blurry. Removing a user's ability to easily opt out of data collection is not a feature upgrade. It is a restructuring of the relationship between user and platform in a direction that serves the platform, not the user. There is a specific kind of anger that comes not from a single large betrayal, but from the accumulation of small ones. And nowhere has Microsoft accumulated more small betrayals than in its progressive transformation of the Windows interface into an advertising surface. The Start menu now displays promoted application tiles, These are not personalized recommendations based on your usage history. These are paid placements. Advertisers have paid to appear in the menu that sits at the center of your computing experience. The interface you open dozens of times a day has become, functionally, a billboard that you also happen to use for launching applications. The File Explorer, a tool as fundamental to Windows as a steering wheel is to a car, now surfaces OneDrive promotions and Microsoft 365 subscription suggestions. Every time you open your file manager to do something as basic as find a document or move a folder, you're also being upsold a subscription service. The settings panel carries similar intrusions. Neutral, functional spaces have become opportunities to extract additional revenue. Here is why this matters beyond the obvious annoyance. The Windows operating system is not free. Users pay for it. When you purchase a product, there is an implicit agreement. I give you money, you give me the tool, and we're even. The moment the seller begins extracting additional revenue through advertising within the paid product, they are breaking that agreement. They are being paid twice for the same relationship, once by the user who bought the license, and again by the advertiser who bought the placement. The term for this is double monetization, and the community identified it clearly, consistently, and with documentation. It was not manufactured outrage. It was a precise objection to a specific practice that violated the terms of the relationship users thought they had with their operating system. Every slow erosion has a moment where it becomes a visible fracture. For Windows 11's relationship with its users, that moment had a name: recall. Microsoft introduced recall as an AI-powered productivity feature, a system that would take continuous screenshots of your computing activity, analyze them, and create a searchable history of everything you had ever done on your device. The pitch was productivity. The reality, as independent security researchers discovered almost immediately, was something categorically different. The screenshots were being stored locally and included sensitive information: banking interfaces, private messages, medical records, passwords, personal photographs, essentially an unfiltered visual log of your entire digital life. The security architecture protecting this data was, in the assessment of multiple credible researchers, inadequate for the sensitivity of what was being stored. Malware that gained access to a device could, in theory, exfiltrate an entire history of a user's computing life in a single operation. Microsoft's response told the story better than any critic could. The feature was postponed, sent back for a fundamental redesign. This was not a minor patch. This was an institutional emergency retreat from a feature that had been marketed and positioned as a flagship capability. What made recall so damaging was not just the security flaw, it was the design philosophy it revealed. The architecture of continuous screenshot capture, local AI indexing, and persistent storage of sensitive activity is the architecture of surveillance. For users who had already spent 2 years watching their start menu become a billboard and their hardware declared obsolete for commercial reasons, recall was not a surprise. It was a confirmation. It fit the pattern. Alongside all of this runs a quieter grievance, felt in the daily rhythm of computing in a way that larger controversies sometimes are not. The Windows Update experience. Windows 11 updates are not optional in any meaningful sense. They arrive on Microsoft's schedule, not yours. The forced restart dialogues interrupt active work sessions. When you defer, Windows defers on its own terms, until it decides the deferral period has expired and performs the restart automatically, regardless of what you were doing. Feature updates compound this. Each new version of Windows 11 can bring interface changes that were not requested and cannot be reversed. The taskbar, customizable in Windows 10, became a restricted panel in Windows 11. Context menus were redesigned without a setting to restore the previous version. The spatial familiarity that experienced users depend on, the muscle memory of knowing exactly where everything is, gets disrupted without warning and without recourse. Each individual change might seem minor in isolation, but in combination, across years, the cumulative effect is a platform that communicates consistently. Your preferences are secondary. Our decisions take precedence. You will adapt. A tool that updates itself involuntarily, changes its interface without asking, and resists customization is no longer fully yours. Now we arrive at the part that converts all of this from a complaint into a data story. The Steam Hardware Survey, the monthly census that Valve takes of its gaming platform's user base, has been recording something consistent. Linux gaming percentages have been rising, and the timeline of acceleration correlates with the Windows 11 controversy cycle in a pattern that analysis is no longer comfortable calling coincidental. Stack Overflow's annual developer surveys have captured a similar trend. Linux usage among professional developers has been growing. The specific frustrations documented in that community, forced account requirements, advertising and professional tools, unsolicited interface changes, map precisely onto the documented Windows 11 objections. The community forums tell a third version of the same story. Migration posts on Linux communities have shifted in character. What once read as exploratory, I'm thinking about trying Linux, now more frequently reads as settled documentation. I've been on Linux for 8 months. Here's what I've learned. The language of experiment has given way to the language of settlement. And critically, the gaming gap, historically the strongest argument against Linux migration, has been closing. Valve's Proton compatibility layer has expanded dramatically. The practical barrier to migration is lower than it has ever been. This means the switching cost, the single most powerful force keeping users on Windows despite their dissatisfaction, is no longer doing the work it used to do. When trust erosion accelerates while switching costs decline, when these two curves cross, you get exactly what the data is now showing, a migration that is quiet, steady, and measurable. There is something philosophically significant about what is happening here that goes beyond market share percentages. Windows was not just an operating system. It was the substrate of an entire generation's relationship with computing. The trust that users placed in it was not calculated or provisional. It was the trust that comes from decades of daily dependence, from a tool that simply worked, from a platform that felt, even if this feeling was always somewhat illusory, like it was on your side. What the Windows 11 decisions represent, examined in totality, is the systematic conversion of that trust into revenue. The hardware requirement accelerates replacement cycles. The account requirement enriches data profiles. The advertising intrusions monetize the interface. The recall architecture surveils behavior. The update system removes autonomy. Each decision extracts value from the user relationship rather than investing in it. And users have noticed, not because they analyzed it in clinical terms, but because they felt it. The platform that was supposed to be a tool started feeling like a tenant who had overstayed a welcome and begun charging rent for using the kitchen. Here is the uncomfortable reality that this data forces into the open. When a platform treats its users' loyalty as a resource to be extracted, rather than a relationship to be maintained, the extraction works, until it doesn't. And when it stops working at scale. The users who are leaving are not extreme Linux enthusiasts who are always looking for a reason to migrate. They are ordinary users, developers, professionals, and gamers who reached a threshold. The threshold is different for each person. For some, it was the TPM block that declared their hardware dead. For others, it was the day advertising appeared in their file manager. For others still, it was reading the recall security research and recognizing what that architecture meant, but they all crossed a threshold. And on the other side of that threshold, they discovered something that surprised many of them, that the alternative was more accessible than they had been told, more capable than they had assumed, and more respectful of their autonomy than the platform they were leaving. Microsoft still has hundreds of millions of users. The platform is not collapsing tomorrow. But the user relationship, whose deterioration this migration reflects, is real and measurable. And the honest response, not the damage control, not the careful framing in quarterly presentations, is an acknowledgement that the decisions that drove this deterioration were not inevitable. They were choices. They served specific commercial interests, and they cost something real. The users who left understood that. That is precisely why they left. The numbers do not lie. The migration is not a threat anymore. The migration is already happening. And if you've been thinking about making the switch yourself, or if you're just trying to understand what all the noise is about, drop your questions in the comments, because this conversation is far from over. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's just getting started.